Hello and welcome to another workshop in Dev to Dev Talk series. Today we'll talk about React and the best practices while writing in it. So we will cover multiple topics. There will be 6 main rules for you to follow. And let's start without any hesitation. So the first thing we need to do is to open our project and search for the component as an example. We will be exploring the header component today, and all the examples will be based on its code. So let's begin by first noticing that in all our components we only have one class declaration. So header is a single class declared in this file. Also, so even though it's declared here, we can see that export default located in the same line as a class. This is not the best approach. The best approach is to export the class separately. So export of the class name will always be the component, and export default the class, the header itself. And here we could use any wrappers, like we could use, for example, a function which would wrap our component and connect it with something. So rule number 1 is to let's draw it. So let's write it down here. So the rule number 1 for us will be to one file, one class per file, one class per file. So one class per file, this is important. And the second rule is always export class. Export without default. So export class, any constants we have, like you can see here, we have multiple constants here in the very top. So you can see that all the constants used in the header are also exported. And this is very important. So always export class and constants. And then what we can add is, if you have exported them, then you can safely do export default and proceed. Because when someone will be overriding or some kind of modifying your class, your component, he could want to work with your exported class specifically, and not the exported by default class. Yes, well, one class per file, always export class and constants. Good. So what else do we have? We have to divide into smaller methods. So if we can see here, we have very big amount of methods which do very small things. So what we recommend you doing is, if you have some functionality, try to keep as low nesting of elements in your rendering functions, so when someone will need to change them, he will easily change them without copy pasting the whole previous logic. So try to keep your JSX nesting as minimal as possible, and to do it you need to separate into multiple functions. So separate into functions and keep JSX nesting low. So we are splitting into smaller functions, so into multiple functions, and keeping our JSX nesting small. What else are we doing? So as you may notice here, we have the block declaration and element declaration, and no class names. So guys, to efficiently and properly use class name system in ScanDPWA, you must master the BEM prop. So please make sure to read the official library which we are using for him, which is called rebem.jsx. So if you open it up, you will see that it has this block, element, modifier, and mix. Mix is important. Most people do not understand how it works. So guys, block, element, mode, and mix is what you need to understand if writing classes, and make sure you're doing this. Make sure you are using them instead of the class name prop. More importantly, we have class name prop banned at all in ScanDPWA by ESLint, but it still can be used, but we encourage you not to. So the third thing will be, here is the website, which you can follow and read more about the BAM props. It's called ReBAM.jsx. Google it up, you will find it very easily. And you can see that it adds 4 props: block prop, element prop, modes prop, and mix prop. And note that you can only use them on the HTML elements inside of the JSX. Otherwise, they should be declared props and handled separate. So if you want to set block on some component, you must make sure that the component itself supports it. So this is important. Well, guys, very good. So we are familiar with ReBAM and we are using it. So let's write it down. Number 4 is master BAM and escape class names. Also, you should escape class names because they are not dynamic fields, and because they are not dynamic fields, it's very hard to work with them. So you cannot really make sure that that the classes you are applying are working efficiently. You need to concatenate strings. This is always hard work to do. So keep your class names in those block, element, modes, and mix props. Very good. Let's switch back. Now, what else do we have here? We must split into components, by which I mean if you have some function, let's draw it here. If you have some function which you would like to, for example, you have an element array which you would like to map, but on each click of the element in this array, we want to fire some action. So if we have a function like this, where we have a list element, which, for example, has here the items array. So we're doing items map. So we're mapping all the items. And here we have the item itself. And what we are doing with it, we are trying to return some li element. And this li element will have on click, where we're trying to pass the item's ID, for example. So we need to do this on click. And we're calling some handler for on click. So it will be on click. We will do this dot handle click, and then we will pass ID. This, guys, is a very poor approach to implementing this. Yeah. So if this is your li, and here it is, if this is your li and this is your script, then you're most probably doing something wrong. Because when you are, so here it is. So remember, if you are mapping something inside, and then here you're using, or not mapping, if you're just using the arrow functions like this in the render, what you are really doing is you are creating those anonymous functions in every render, which is very slow. So to prevent this from happening, what you guys instead should do is, instead of the rendering li on click with all of this content inside, you should create a smaller component which will be called list item in your case, yeah. And this list item should accept a prop called ID, or item. So instead of passing the ID and creating the anonymous function every click, you instead create a smaller component and you pass the item as a prop to this component. And then inside of it, you are not using the arrow function. You're just saying that on click, you're just saying this handle click, and then in the handle click, because you can set it like this, because this function will always be constant and it will always be using the ID from the item prop. So this is the way to go, split into smaller components. And this is a rule number 5 for us. So we must split into smaller components. Very good. And by splitting with the smaller components, we will achieve the more efficient rendering. So split into smaller components. Amazing, guys. So we are splitting into smaller components. What else should we do? Is we should use the ESLint. Well, guys, if you don't know how to configure it, please follow this video because it's a very important tool. And what it allows you to do is to write a consistent and beautiful code, which everyone in your team would love. And then if you would contribute, we will also love seeing the code, which we can easily read and are familiar with. So follow our standard and please use ESLint. Well, let's write it down as well. So here, let's put it here. Yep, the good place for it. So use ESLint. So make sure your code is linted, and this is important. Cool. What else should I recommend? Well, importantly, you should make sure your components are as clear from the necessary functionality, I mean business functionality, which handles something, which does something, which requests something or reads something from URL. Any logic should be contained in the containers. So containers must contain all the logic and be responsible for clicks, for setting something, for switching the state, whatever. In the component, you can keep the logic which will change the appearance on click, for example, or switch the items on click, but the main logic of how those items interact with each other and whatever should be located in the container. So this is another rule of thumb we should follow. The number 7 is place business logic into containers. And another thing immediately about containers is that when using them, please make sure you're following the official, or we would say default common way of writing them when you have this container props and where you have the container functions. Let's check, do we have container functions here? Yes, we do. So container functions. And those container functions and container props, the container props are providing the constant values that are required for the component to render, and the container functions are the functions which you are calling from the component in order to change the state or to make a request, whatever. So guys, number 8 or number 2 in the container specific best practices is to use container props and container functions. Why you should also use them is because they allow you to have a more efficient renderers. Why? Well, because instead of passing the props from the parent component, you are passing the processed props from your component. So container props, it will always be a little bit more efficient than all the props which are passed to your component, because if it is a page, for example, it has multiple props which are not used, and you should avoid I would say you should avoid passing all of them. Make sure you're only passing those props which you need. And you can see that if we open the container props here, we can see that some props are passed as they are, like for example navigation state and card totals, but some props are added from state. So instead of destructing the state and props into your, sorry, I will showcase you that. So you can see that in container props, we are passing some values as they are, and some value are coming from state, but not all of them, because there are more in state and there are more in props. We're just using what we need. So try to make sure that your components only receive the props which they want, which they really need from the containers, and don't destruct state and props into them. Very good. So this also is a thing about the containers and components. make sure that they are using and declaring prop types and default props. This will be reminded to you by ESLint, of course, but if you are not 100% sure how to configure it, well, configure it and then make sure that you're declaring a proper prop types. The prop types.shape, like we commonly see, is lazy and doesn't really give any information about an object which you are passing. So please, guys, make sure your prop types are descriptive enough. We have a specific folder for storing prop types here. It is the components, it is app type, and here are all the types which are for CMS blocks, for configurations, whatever, very big amount of them. So make sure to make your prop types as descriptive as possible. So number 9 is keep prop types descriptive. So you are keeping your prop types descripting, and it makes us, developers who will be working with your project, me or your colleague, better understand what you meant in the code. And the last thing I would say for today is keep your code clean overall. Make sure you're following overall best practices, and you can find more about the smaller best practices, I would say, common issues. You can read more about common issues, and on this page I will show that here, or you can read it on the docs. So go to the theme and then open the coding standard, and here you might find multiple best practices which we encourage you to use, and this list will update over time, so keep an eye on it, and we will possibly create a repository, specific repository for this kind of issues, and we might share it for you specifically. So by reading it out loud, by understanding what issues are very common to be made, you will learn yourself. So number 10, I'm sorry, is make sure to follow code standard, and stay tuned. What is important? So subscribe to receive the latest information. Otherwise, we might move forward. We might decide on something better. We might introduce some new ESLint rules for your convenience, but you might skip it. You might lose this information. So make sure you are subscribed and you are staying tuned. Well, guys, thank you for watching. This was the Dev2Dev talk about React, and thank you. I hope this best practices will help you write your code better. Thank you, guys, and see you guys.